I want to continue from the last lecture talking about specifically about China's development and the different geographies of that development. So we can think about China's current economy as what you can call a socialist market economy. We have talked earlier in the quarter about the ideas of capitalism and socialism as different ways of organizing the economy and society. But it's important to not think of these as two dichotomous things, but more of a gradation between the two different elements. So even what people often associate as very capitalist based societies, such as the United States, have socialist elements to it in terms of things like public education, public roads, these sorts of things that have some government control. In places where you have more socialist economies, there's often market economies that exist, even if they're informal and sort of below the radar of the state. So within China's current economy, you have kind of a hybrid of a capitalist market-based economy with the socialist tendencies of central planning and a one-party state, so the Chinese Communist Party as that one party. So you have the state ownership of different strategic industries, and then the private sector as controlling a lot of the commodity production and light industry. We can look at the chart here on the right that shows how this breaks down in terms of urban employees in various enterprises. So this is workers in the city. You can see here the largest sector, or one of the large sectors, is shown in the black as people who work in state-owned entities, about 20% of the population. Private enterprises show up as about 17%. 13% as self-employed, and the rest of it kind of broken down to things like limited liability corporation, foreign invested entities, companies limited by shares, et cetera, et cetera. And then the largest 28% made up by other types of enterprises. So a variety in terms of the types of enterprises where urban workers are finding employment. One of the big issues with that one-party control of the market and society is authoritarian politics. So within that, people don't have a lot of voice for dissent. There's increasing inequality between different groups within Chinese society, especially between what urban residents make versus what rural residents have. Again, we talked about almost 50% of the population living on less than $2 a day, where the average GDP is about $6,000 a year per capita. So really quite a disparity between what's often rural versus urban folks living in China. There is a lack of political rights in a lot of contexts, and one of the sort of key flashpoints in regards to that was a campaign against the Communist Party in Tiananmen Square in 1989. And that's one of the things that's pictured here on the right, where you have an individual standing up to the tanks of the Chinese army there in Tiananmen Square. This also manifests in things like control of internet access from within China, so blocking certain sites from people that are living within China, and different issues with people's political rights and ability to sort of speak out against things that they see or that they want to critique in society. If we think about the geography of this huge economic development and growth within China, initial sort of contact was in what was termed special economic zones, or SEZs. And these special economic zones were located along the eastern coast of China. Now, this makes sense in terms of transportation, so being able to get commodities out quickly to ship them to the United States. That's become one of the more active ports in the world on the west coast of the United States, because so much stuff comes from China. So within these special economic zones, you have kind of an area that's segregated specifically for export processing for multinational corporations. So companies are able to come in, make an investment there. Often there is very cheap labor available. Land is given at a low price. There's tax breaks from the government, so businesses might not even have to pay local taxes. And then you have we talked about agglomeration economies. As businesses and people are located together in a cluster, they're able to network and draw on the resources of each other. So within these places, you have concentrations of businesses and smart people who are able to really try to produce things as efficiently as possible. And so you had these as sites for foreign investment coming in from Hong Kong and Taiwanese businessmen especially to help development sort of grow out from these areas. You can see some of these along the coast here in areas like Hong Kong and the sort of southeastern corner of China. This map shows some of the major industrial regions in the yellow color here. So you have areas here where there's a lot of small firms and mixed investment from the state and private firms, often these firms coming from outside of the country. So these are kind of, again, more areas that kind of serve as agglomeration economies and efficiently produce goods. You can see here in places like around Wuhan, again, that southeast corner of China as well, up around Beijing as well. So within this, we talked about, China having non-state enterprises as part of the economy. A lot of the actual growth that happens, 80% of China's GDP is generated by non-state enterprises. So though the state is a big player and has some control over the economy, the majority of what's happening is generated by non-state enterprises. If we think about what this means in terms of actual individual incomes, we can use this cartogram of China to see how GNP per capita breaks down. Now, most of us aren't extremely familiar with what the shape of China should be, but we know that this is a bit off. What we see here, again with the cartogram, is the size of a particular area is morphed to fit the amount that's being shown. So you can see along the coast, you have higher amounts of GNP per capita. So in places like Beijing and Shanghai, Guangdong, places like that. As we move into the interior of the country, those incomes are much less as we go to the west. If we think a little bit more about that rural-urban inequality, we can look at what it has meant in terms of folks who are living in rural areas and how the amount of China's economy that's taken up by agricultural work or work in the primary sector has changed since market reforms. As you can see on this chart, it's gone down since 1977 from about 28% of the economy to about 11%. So you have a lot less income, and that has fallen faster than the share of the rural population. So there's still huge numbers of folks in China that are living in rural areas when farming income is falling, and these folks are really then pushed by that into moving to urban areas to try to work in industry there. This is going to help keep wages relatively low in China because of this influx of folks as well. But with that movement of people, you're going to have huge growth in Chinese cities. One of the interesting things about China is that there's kind of a differentiation between rural and urban citizens. So if you are born in a rural area, that is something that's actually on your government ID. Your movements are somewhat restricted in that you can't just move into any city that you want. And the goal of that is to stop there from being a huge influx of rural immigrants into specific cities and sort of overwhelm these cities. So there's a lot of control placed on migrants. But as China's economy continues to grow, they're expecting urban growth to be huge in China. By 2025, it's expected that China will have 23 cities that have more than 5 million people, 22 cities that have more than 10 people, and 15 cities that have more than 25 million people. So really huge cities that's going to require a lot of investment in infrastructure, a lot of resources to be brought into these cities to be able to support the populations there. And because we have a system that has some level of state control, there might be some aspects of it that can be sort of planned for and controlled in terms of how urban growth is going to happen. And that's one of your activities for this week, is to explore some different scenarios for urban growth in China and to try to think about if you had to make a decision as a planner, what sort of things would be important to you in terms of how to manage that growth. If we think about population overall within China, most of us know that this country has a very large population, over 1 billion people. And if we look at how that's broken down, we can see that the majority of those folks live in the eastern part of the country. So areas in the deepest red have more than 1,000 people per square kilometer. So there's density in a lot of those main cities along the coast, and then a lot of densities in the highly productive agricultural areas. Fertility has declined overall. A lot of that's from government controls on the number of children that folks can have, but there's also been increased longevity for people. So we see population pyramids here. This one on the left is from the year 2000. So you see kind of a pyramid overall that has begun to kind of even out, if not decline, and the expectation but that by 2050 that the population should be pretty stabilized. Though China has a lot of people in the country, China is a pretty big country in terms of area. So though there's a lot of people, we don't have to really think too much about overcrowding and density necessarily. However, if we switch gears to look at Japan and what the population is like there, we can see that because Japan is an island, it has much more limited area available, that they've really had to concentrate population specifically in this area of the multiple cities along the southern coast, where you have Kyoto, Yokohama, places like that. So this is the primary area of population concentration, especially because most of the country is fairly rugged and mountainous. So in these urban areas, you have the majority of the folks living and in fairly small quarters. So the average household is only about 650 square feet. And property and space itself is very expensive overall. And you can see some of these mega cities here. Tokyo has a population of about 30 million people, so very large population centers. Switching gears back to China, again, China has had this large population, but a lot of emphasis on trying to control that population. In 1979, they put forward the idea of having a one-child policy. So couples were only allowed to have one child in urban areas, two children if you were living in rural areas. So this was sort of put in place through a series of benefits for you if you sort of towed the line and had only one child, and disincentives if you had more than one. What that has done has changed the ratio of men to women within the population. Because men were favored within the population, female children were aborted. So you have this changing male to female ratio. So this created a generation where there's huge numbers of only children. We can think about, as an only child, you have the full attention of your parents and two sets of grandparents, so a lot of attention given to those children. For every 119 baby boys that were born, there was only 100 girls. When you sort of scale that out to such huge populations, the prediction is that there's going to be 30 million unmarried young men who just don't have a female out there to be able to find and marry because of that lack of women within the population. And here are some of those images again from Hungry Planet. So this is a family from China and what they eat in a week. This is a family from Japan. and what they eat in a week. And finally, a family from Mongolia.